But then I think the biggest problem for AK and the biggest frustration for Bulls fans watching AK and how he's operated for the last 3 years is that he, unlike Poles, has not been willing to face some of those hard decisions and make them. Because I think Poles came into that job with the Bears and said, this team with these aging vets that are expensive aging vets, and they're good, maybe still in their prime, but at the back end of their prime, are creating this problem that won't allow us to improve the roster in other ways. We're hamstrung by this expensive aging talent. And AK has refused to admit that he has put himself into a similar corner with this Bulls roster and aging vets like Vooch, DeMar, and to a lesser extent, but even still, Zach LaVine.
I think it actually goes further than that. You look at the aging vets, the reason he wants to keep them is because those are the best players on the team. The real problem is that he's not willing to be bad because he just isn't. I guess we don't really have a good explanation for that. I think the bigger thing is you have to be willing to take a few lumps and go that direction. And I get it. He came into this job to get the Bulls out of that bottom area, but it didn't work. So you can't just try to hang on to the middle now. I feel like AK kind of said we just want to be competitive, and then he kind of came back and corrected himself after the season. But there's no way guys get into his level as an executive and don't want to win championships.
Sure.
And I think one thing that Poles kind of had going for him is that he came into a situation and his day one was going to rebuild, right? Now, if you're AK and you just finished your four-year contract and you have a 2-year extension, do you want to start a rebuild now? Understanding that you may not be around to get into the end of it. I almost feel like it would be.
But I mean, you've said yourself, Will, the other side of that coin, the theory that when you do and do so with the blessings of ownership, aka your bosses, start a rebuild, it buys you a little time because they are patiently waiting to see what happens with that rebuild.
But does it buy you time? Is 2 years enough to buy you that extra time? I almost feel like in order to undertake a rebuild, you have to have job security and you have to be under contract for more than 2 years. And so part of me feels like either somebody else should come in and just take it away, or AK needs to have more runway on his contract to be able to make those hard decisions that may not end up manifesting until 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years down the line. And I don't know how executive contracts typically work in terms of length, but it's always been with the Bulls, Jerry Krause had a job for 18 years and Gar and Pax had 17. They've had runway, but having that job security of the contract actually extending to that point, I think would help give him a little bit more security and comfortability with making some of those hard decisions, because that's really what it comes down to. You have to be willing to be bad. You have to be willing to go that direction because that's ultimately how you get over that hump. And by spending the first 4 years, he basically spent the first half of his first season evaluating things, seeing if they could take a jump. Then he traded for Vooch. Then you, in that summer, bring in Lonzo and Caruso and DeMar. Okay, now you're ready to cook, and you spend 2 years underachieving. Or 3 years, really. I mean, half of that first year worked really well, but now he's in a situation where he's basically got 2 years before his contract is over, and he has to do a whole rebuild. He needs more security if he's really going to undertake it. And I don't know if it should be him or somebody else, but I do think that's a reality of the situation.
And he's coming in. He's actually the first one in a long time coming in as a quote unquote outsider,
right?
Because we're talking about Jerry Krause.
Krause was Reinsdorf's guy,
and so was Paxson.
And Paxson was Jerry's guy.
This is Mike Reinsdorf's guy. This is a different thing coming in from another team. These guys are already ingrained into the culture of what the Chicago Bulls are. So I don't know how long his leash will be, or if they're going to treat him the same kind of way and afford him that time that he would need. And plus, he didn't come in with the ideology of thinking I'm going to have to rebuild either. He came in to say, let me make these moves right here, get my coach I want.
That's probably why he got the
these
job,
players.
because he was able to sell that to ownership.
Correct. I can get these players, we can get winning, and we can keep moving that way. It didn't work out for him. Now he has to rethink and retool. I think the biggest thing, Matt, and you said it without saying what I wanted you to say, the word for me is self-awareness. They are not.
What's that?
AK is not self-aware, And I'm not saying it's a bad thing in this situation because he wants to believe in what he has.
Yeah.
He wants to say, dude, I got it right. Let me work it out and just move forward like that. Ryan Poles was different. Ryan Poles could afford to be a little more self-aware, especially with Justin Fields, who he didn't want to trade, because he knew he had something over here. He had a nice little golden ticket, right here. So you can afford to take a little more chances and be a little more self-aware about where you are with your team. Now, that's not to say he didn't make great decisions. You know what I'm saying? Like you mentioned, Robert Quinn, thought was a great decision to get him out of here. I thought Khalil Mack was a great decision. Guys who were good but with just big contracts. You know what I mean? AK brought those guys in. Those other guys are already kind of here. You know what I mean? Outside of Robert Quinn. Those guys are already kind of here. You know what I mean? And established. So it takes away some of that sting that Ryan Poles had on that, or attachment, I should say. AK just did not want to give that up.
Right.
He was like,
the one who said, I'm going to go get Vooch.
Right.
And try to make this team competitive now.
Don't make any trades, Orlando. I want him. This is my guy. You know what I mean? Nope, we're going to re-sign him again because that's my guy. This is going to work. This is why Lonzo is still on the table. It's still an option for Lonzo on the table. He doesn't want to give that up. So his self-awareness has to be a little bit better for him to pivot and understand, dude. Well, I think he mentioned that he understands it now, but now we just kind of got to see it.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, because he's got a shorter leash in terms of the remaining years on his contract, like, maybe there's a chance he won't fully divest and go into that rebuild and sell off his guys. I mean, it would have been as if, like, instead of, the Bears trading back from the number 1 pick with Carolina, what if he just felt super committed to Fields, he was going to go that direction, and he said, you know what, maybe we'll move back to 2 or 3, let's draft Will Anderson, and maybe we get a wide receiver in a trade that way. Great, now you've got Justin, but you don't have that big golden lottery ticket of the next year. Correct. And now you're building towards the middle again. You're building towards, we've got a couple of good young players, but we don't have a true superstar. We've got a guy who we like, but they haven't necessarily proven that he can be beyond like a 7 or 10 win team.
Sure.
And so I do think it's just like, yes, Matt, maybe he buys himself a little bit of time if he does undergo a full rebuild and like can kind of kick the can down the road in that way. But I think there's also a world where he recognizes, look, I've only got 2 years to make something happen. Maybe, we let DeMar walk, or maybe we sign and trade him. Maybe we can move Zach, but like let's hang on to Io and Kobe. Probably not going to be able to move Vooch, and like let's try to be good with a different version of these same pieces. And I think if you do that, you're just going to run into ultimately where you are now. You're going to get back to the middle, and you're not going to be able to fully break through that like glass ceiling of being a mediocre team. You might get to the other side. Like right now, the Bulls are in like the lower middle class. They're on the lower side of mediocrity. Sure. Like maybe they get to the upper side of mediocrity, but you're not going to be able to break through that unless I think you fully go into this the right way. Yeah. And that's, I think, where my big concern is now is like, yes, I think he recognizes things need to change. He needs to make some hard decisions, but is he going to go fully into a rebuild the way that I think he probably needs to in order to ultimately come out the other side?
We all silly like the mayor.